Good Erev Shabbos. Stand before you today with a heavy heart, a heart filled with anguish about the events that occurred this week in the United States of America. The unthinkable has occurred. The United States Capitol, not just a building, but a symbol of American democracy, was attacked by a violent mob, and it's a very traumatic event. Just looking at the pictures, some of the videos. And it's clearly a low for us as a country, as a people. And I'm hoping that this can be an inflection point for all of us. First of all, looking inward, saying how can we as people, each citizen for themselves, move forward in a positive, in a healing manner. It's important not to look outward and blame other people and other groups, but think to ourselves what we can all do in terms of making change for the better. So I think as a society, I just want to suggest a couple thoughts of reflection. And perhaps, I'm sure there are other thoughts of reflection, but perhaps as we let these thoughts of reflection marinate in our heads, we can move forward from this low, from this dark period, into better days in front of us. So the first area I want to suggest that we need reflection on is the death of nuance. Now, over the last several years, we as a society have become very polarized. We have been forced, or we've been told that we're forced to make binary choices. It's either this or that. It's either you're completely in favor of mandatory confiscation of guns, or you are in support of unlimited gun rights with no restriction, and so on and so forth. We've been told you must choose one way or the other way. The middle of the road approach, the more nuanced approach, has not been paid attention to. You know, as a student of halacha, over the years, even though sometimes halacha may be viewed as absolute or as inflexible, the truth of the matter is any serious student of halacha will tell you that there's a lot of nuance and gray area within halacha. A couple of famous examples of that are, of course, we know we're supposed to fast in Yom Kippur. We're supposed to keep the Shabbos, but there are situations that one would be exempt from these sacred obligations. The only absolute that we have as Jews is Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, that we believe in one God, but the one God that we believe in doesn't want us to adopt an extreme position on anything. We're talking about even areas of halach, of sacred obligations. Certain situations require some thought, nuance. And the reality is that has been a casualty in this caustic political environment, this caustic arena that we have found ourselves in this country for several years now. So I think it's important to take a step back and reevaluate and reflect on that point. Another thing I think it's important to mention is the notion of two wrongs don't make a right. There's no person, there's no group out there that doesn't have their warts. Everybody has their warts, everybody has their shortcomings, every political party has their shortcomings, every person we all have our own issues. And it's important, sometimes we just need to take responsibility for ourselves without saying, but what about that group? But what about the other group? What about, there's a famous story in Tanakh about the first king of Israel. The first king of Israel was Shaul HaMelech, King Saul. King Saul was king for precisely 2 years. he was kicked out of office after 2 years. The reason why he was kicked out of office for 2 years was not because he committed an error. After all, which he did, he committed a grave error with the Battle of Amalek. After all, his successor, King David, had multiple infractions over the years with moral lapses of judgment throughout the years, and King David was king for 40 years. So why was it that King David was able to be king for 40 years and King Saul, after one mistake, was kicked out of office after 2 years? And the answer is because there was a crucial difference between Shaul HaMelech and David HaMelech, King Saul and King David. It wasn't because King David was necessarily more righteous than King Saul. But King David, when he committed moral lapse and a lapse of judgment, an error, a sin, he took responsibility for his actions. When King Saul committed his error, his grave error with Amalek, he did not. He tried to dodge. He said, what about that? Was the other people? That's not a leader. A leader needs to take responsibility for their actions. And we have to look at ourselves and say, we have to take responsibility for what we do. There's other groups that may be acting worse. That's definitely not what Judaism teaches us about responsibility and leadership. And finally, I want to make another point just by saying over a famous story. The famous story of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was the Jewish sage at the time of the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, the Second Temple. And he desperately wanted to meet Vespasian, the Roman general who turned emperor, and he wanted to negotiate with him terms for the Jewish defeat. And he was smuggled out in a coffin. He had to fake his own death. There's a whole story. The Zealots didn't want Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai to meet the Roman general turned emperor. But in any event, he met him, and the Roman general Vespasian said, Rabbi, whatever you want, let me know. I'll agree to your request. And he asks him for 3 seemingly very unimportant requests, to which the general said yes. And the rabbis and the historians have asked for 2,000 years already. Why didn't Rabbi Yochanan just ask for the bank, meaning that Jerusalem should be spared? He had the general, the emperor, saying, just Rabbi, whatever you want. And the answer is, as Rabbi Yisrael Reisman once put it this way, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was teaching us how to be a gracious loser. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was teaching us that we don't always get what we want in life. In that case, the fate of Jerusalem had already been sealed. It had been sealed, it was doomed to its fate at that point. He recognized and was pragmatic about that. But Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai wanted to teach us how to lose with dignity. You know, after such a polarizing election, many of us in our community voted for President Trump with lots of good reason. In fact, I would say the majority of Orthodox Jewry in the United States, it's not me saying it, data is pointed, had voted for President Trump, and many of us were disappointed and despaired after the election. I heard a lot of despair in many people's voices. This is perhaps the beginning of the death spiral of the Republic. We have to remember the lesson of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, that sometimes we're not always going to be on the winning side. Sometimes we're going to be on the losing side. But you know, life goes on. Life goes on. One of the My favorite part of NFL games is not what occurs on the field during the game. What occurs immediately after the game, the post-game ritual, where you have the losing coach walk onto the field and congratulate the winning coach, or the losing quarterback congratulate the winning quarterback. It's not just about wins and losses in life. It's about the dignity of humanity. And that is more than the win and loss column. And we see that not only from Rabbi Yochanan and Zakkai, who taught us that, but we see that after professional football games here today. But I think that's a larger lesson for the rest of us in life, that we have to embrace that value. We're not always going to get what we want, but we have to move forward with dignity and respect. So ladies and gentlemen, as we move on from this low point, let us engage in a period of self-reflection and not look outward, as I mentioned, but look inward and ask ourselves what we can do to positively affect our future. Everybody looks at themselves and says, what we can do to positively affect our future. Then hopefully we will move towards a period of healing and reconciliation. I wish you all a very good Erev Shabbos.